No safety or security for Palestinians in Gaza. A truce is in place, but Israeli strikes target the Strip nearly every day. Hundreds of people have been killed since it took effect in October. So what's the purpose of the ceasefire deal? This is Inside Story. Hey there, I'm Scott McLean. A ceasefire was agreed to in October, but it has not stopped the Israeli army's attacks on the Gaza Strip. Palestinians who have endured Israel's genocidal war are still being targeted. Nothing is off limits, including homes, tents sheltering the displaced, even funerals. The death toll is rising. Israel says it's targeting Hamas fighters, but Gaza's health ministry says most of those killed are women and children. The UN says Palestinians are stuck in a nightmare that's difficult to reconcile with the existence of a truce. Talks to move the deal to the next phase have stalled. So why has the ceasefire failed to stop Israel's attacks on Gaza? What can be done to bring those attacks to an end? We'll discuss that with our guest, but first, this report from Joel Evans.
It's a scene that's become all too familiar in Gaza. Even though a ceasefire has been in effect since October, Israel has continued to carry out attacks on Palestinians. No one is safe. On Friday, at least 14 people were killed when an Israeli drone strike targeted a funeral procession in al-Nusrat refugee camp. Just one of the latest attacks on Gaza. The UN Human Rights Office accuses Israel of systematically targeting the police force. Gaza's government media office has said that Israel has violated the ceasefire more than 3,600 times. Since the US brokered deal was agreed in October, Israeli attacks have killed at least 1,144 Palestinians, and more than 3,700 others have been injured. The first phase of the ceasefire included the withdrawal of Israeli forces to a so-called yellow line, a boundary separating areas occupied by the military from the rest of Gaza. The military continues to seize more of the Strip, and Israeli media reports it now occupies 70% of Gaza. It was already the most densely populated area on Earth, home to nearly 2 million people. The occupation is shrinking the space available for them to live. The healthcare system is slowly collapsing, and medicine is in short supply. The UN says Israel is restricting the amount of aid allowed into Gaza, despite commitments made as part of the truce. The World Health Organization says at least 1,500 Palestinians are awaiting Israel's permission to leave the Strip for medical treatment abroad, but many have died before being transferred. So formally, while the ceasefire deal is in effect, the reality for Palestinians living in Gaza tells a different story. Joel Evans, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
All right, let's bring in our guests. In Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, is Javier Abu Eid, a political analyst and former communications director for the Palestine Liberation Organization. Joining us from occupied East Jerusalem is Julie Norman, associate fellow with the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. She's also the author of Gaza, The Dream and the Nightmare. And in Tel Aviv, Gideon Levy, a columnist at Haaretz newspaper. Thank you all so much for being here. So, since this U.S. brokered 20-point peace plan came into effect in October, you have seen near daily Israeli attacks on Gaza. You've seen at least 1,000 people killed. And Gideon, I just wonder if you can help us understand, why is this still happening?
Why is it still happening, Scott? Because nobody cares. Why is it still happening? Because the world forgot Gaza. Why is it still happening? Because Israel never had an idea how to end this war and had no intention to put an end to this war. And therefore we are facing an endless war, while Israel is quite silent in recent months. On the other side of the border, 1 hour away from Tel Aviv, the genocide goes on, as simple as this. In your figures, you mentioned horrible figures, but the most horrible one is that every day, ever since the ceasefire, every day there is at least one child killed. Can you believe this? 275 children. and it goes on like if that's the routine.
Yeah, it's horrifying. Look, regardless, it seems like at least in some ways we're going through the motions of this peace plan. So Hamas recently announced that it was handing over power to what's called the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, effectively a technocratic committee that's supposed to be ruling the territory. But at least as of a few days ago, Javier, the head of that committee was not even inside of Gaza. So who is actually running Gaza right now? Who's in charge?
That's a very important point, Scott. Thanks for having me here. We know that at least 70% of Gaza is under direct Israeli control, and then the other 30% is still surrounded by Israel all over. Now, there are different areas in Gaza but that are under different kind of control. But I think the most important element here is what your package was mentioning before, that we have 2 million people inside Gaza that are being hijacked by this, or what Gideon was referring to, the fact that nobody cares now about what's happening. And I think Palestinians in Gaza are being victims not just of the international community not caring about what's happening to them, but because of the Israeli elections and the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu has absolutely nothing else to provide. So basically, we should not understand what's happening in Gaza without putting it as part of the overall Israeli strategy against the Palestinian right to self-determination. We should not distract ourselves with what's happening in Gaza to what's happening also, for example, in the occupied West Bank. And I think this is how we should be understanding what's happening now.
Julie, can I just ask you one more question on this whole handover process between Hamas to this technocratic committee? The Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has called this a trick, and he said, quote, Hamas seeks to replicate the Hezbollah model in Gaza. A technocratic administration would be responsible for garbage collection and other municipal services, while Hamas would remain the dominant military force. And I wonder, in your view, is that a valid concern?
Well, I would say that's certainly the way the Israelis are seeing it right now. They see the welcoming, so to speak, of the technocratic committee into Gaza as a way of Hamas simply handing over essentially the stuff that they don't really want to have to deal with anyway, while they can focus more on security and or military. I would say for Hamas right now, it's a lot of questions of which way they can or will go. Some within the group still want to have more of that political role. Others, I think, are quite happy to focus more on resistance and to move in that direction as well. And that's been one, I would say, of the challenges. And the group doesn't have many options available to them at the moment, of course, in the context of the current situation. So they're trying to hold on to some things, but also trying to show that they are willing to make some conciliatory moves towards the board of peace, towards what the Americans are asking for, to move things in another direction as well.
Gideon, under the deal, it's pretty plain that bombings, attacks are supposed to stop. You're there in Israel. I wonder, does the Israeli government have kind of a legalese or a technical justification for why these attacks are continuing? Obviously, they say that they're targeting Hamas, but even under the deal, they're not supposed to be targeting anybody. Is there some explanation where they can claim that they're still within the confines of this peace plan?
Obviously, it's not the only violation of Israel of international law or signed agreements or ceasefires, you name it. Look, because the world lost interest, and above all, because the Americans lost interest, Israel is free to do whatever it wants right now. Israeli public opinion is not concerned at all, and it's hardly also present in Israeli media. And the killing goes on without really anyone being willing to stop it. It's really as simple as this. Israel will find all kinds of excuses, but usually those are lies, because whenever they kill somebody, it's always a terrorist on his way to risk the soldier. But we have to realize something very basic. As long as Israel will stay within the Gaza Strip, this will go on. Because as long as there are Israeli troops there, there will be resistance. And as long as there will be resistance, there will be very harsh Israeli retaliation. So if someone really wants to put an end to it, we have to take out the Israeli troops from Gaza.
Yeah, you made an interesting point, Gideon, that the Americans seem to have lost interest. Javier, do you agree with that assessment?
I think the Americans never truly have a clear policy here. One day they invented this concept of the Board of Peace as a way to replace the United Nations and their operations here in occupied Palestine. But I also think that there is another point, which is that usually U.S. Policy vis-a-vis this region is taken more as a domestic issue, more than as a foreign policy matter. And it is because of, well, you know how things deal with American politics. And I think one of the important elements that Gideon mentioned, and I would like to focus on, is the fact that all of this is happening without any sort of Israeli opposition to it. And I think that's a very important element that also linked with the U.S. Current position, because we hear a lot of talk now that there will be elections in Israel in October, and that a change of government or Netanyahu not being the prime minister may mean a change of the current situation. And what we see is that these killings in Gaza continue, and there is not a single, at least Zionist opposition party in Israel that would raise their voice against what clearly is the continuation of a genocide.
Yeah, Julie, can you just help us understand? So there's this 20-point peace plan drawn up by the Americans, agreed to by both sides. We're supposed to be in phase 2 of that. So could you just help us understand where we're supposed to be, what is supposed to be happening right now, at least?
Sure. So the first phase of the ceasefire that did go into effect was the release of hostages and prisoner releases for Palestinians. So we did see that piece happen, at least partially in terms of Palestinian releases back in the fall. And there was also supposed to be other measures, including a specific amount of humanitarian aid coming into the Strip, which hasn't been met, and also the opening of the Rafah crossing, which has been minimal at best. The second phase, though, was always going to be the hardest part. It's the part that included the introduction of this technocratic committee, the introduction of an international stabilization force, but really quite crucially, the two biggest pieces was the demilitarization of Hamas on the one hand and the withdrawal of the IDF, the Israeli military, on the other. Those pieces are the two pieces that were always going to be the most difficult, and they're the two that we see both Israel and Hamas really not wanting to move on. Obviously, for Israel right now, with the elections coming up, Netanyahu is not looking to make any changes, is looking to either maintain or expand the status quo. And I would say the same for Hamas. It's in their interest right now to also maintain the status quo and to kind of stall as much as possible from needing to make any concessions when, from their point of view, Israel has not met its obligations from the first phase. There's no guarantees it will withdraw if Hamas does any kind of demilitarization gestures, and this is not part of a negotiated process towards any kind of meaningful political solution to the broader Palestinian question. So for both parties right now, we see what I think was somewhat expected stalling at this moment, but it's very difficult to see how to get out of this logjam.
Okay, so that's my question for Javier there. It seems like we're in this chicken and egg scenario where Hamas says Israel has to withdraw, Israel says Hamas has to disarm. Somebody's got to move at some point. Is there some other way to kind of break the logjam here?
I think the most important point here to start with is to set the frame. I wouldn't call this a peace agreement. I think we're talking just about perhaps a mere ceasefire. And in the context of this ceasefire, the focus has been on Hamas disarmament more than anything else. And once again, this makes 2 million people remain hijacked of the situation inside Gaza. Of course, there is a possibility. It is to implement what international responsibility should be doing, and it's to end support for the Israeli occupation of Gaza while putting pressure through international organizations and concrete measures. That, of course, this kind of talk seems to be a dream at this stage, because, as again, I will take again what Gideon said. I don't really think that the international community is interested to invest here. And I think the best example of this is what they are allowing Israel to do here in the occupied West Bank, but there is no Hamas.
Gideon, I hear your point from earlier loud and clear that, look, nothing's going to happen unless the Israelis are willing to withdraw. But actually, it was just 2 months ago that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that they had 60% of the Gaza Strip. Now he wanted to get to 70, which they now are in control of around 70% of the Strip. What is the end game for the Israelis? I mean, what is their goal? To control 100% of it?
Much worse than this. The end game was and is still a very far away end game, and everyone knows it's far away, but there is an end game. The end game is Gaza Strip without Palestinians. It's very clear. They are trying to sabotage any attempt to rehabilitate Gaza. They are preventing any kind of rule in Gaza. I mean, Hamas note and the PA note and international forces note, because they want to keep the people of Gaza, the survivors of Gaza, in their situation in which they are put in tents without any social structure or any functioning institutions. Like this, they will stay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years until nobody will be able to take it anymore and people will start to leave, and they will encourage them to leave, and they will even maybe push them to leave. This does not mean that this is going to happen because they have no place to go. But the plan, the end game, is a ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip. I have no doubts about it.
Julie, do you agree? Is chaos, misery, ethnic cleansing, is that the end game for the Israelis, you think?
I think right now there just is not much of a strategy beyond the coming weeks and months to, again, kind of maintain the status quo, which is suiting Israel just fine, without deepening the international image, detraction of the international image with either even further displacement. But in the long term, I definitely think that's a possibility from what we're seeing. And there are certainly some within the government who I think would be very happy to see that. Again, the Israeli elections will not change everything or even much in Gaza, but a different government will have some different scope and viewpoint of where they see things going. And at the very least, I think we'll see trying to keep Gaza and the better part of it as one of Israel's many buffer zones in the region. That's a very clear policy of Israel's right now, not only in Gaza, but throughout the region. And I think right now there's just a sense of not really caring what happens to people there. And if this situation stays and people leave, I think that would suit many in the government. And if there's another solution to come down the road, it's one that they are just really bothering to think about much right now.
Javier, I saw you shaking your head. Where do you disagree with Julie?
Disagree, because the position to expel Palestinians from Gaza was supported from many people that are now part of the Israeli opposition. I would remember an op-ed signed by Ram Ben Barak from Yair Lapid's party in Wall Street Journal that was calling for what they referred to as voluntary immigration. And I think there is no way to believe that whether they express it publicly, like perhaps Mr. Katz or Bennett or the Smotrich, or they just do it silently, the Israeli opposition, that the end goal of this is not the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And I would be very clear. I think to answer the question of this program, I think the attacks continue not just because the international community doesn't care, but because the goals of the Israeli government have not been met. And the main goal, I agree, is the ethnic cleansing of Gaza.
Gideon, I've been reading the pages of Haaretz lately, and I've seen over the last few weeks or possibly months that some analysis about the election, that there is a possibility that neither Benjamin Netanyahu's bloc nor his opposition bloc would have enough seats in the parliament to actually, or in the Knesset to form a government, and they would rely on the support of Arab parties. Would that fundamentally change the situation, or do you think that neither side would actually do business with those Arab parties?
I'm very sorry to spoil your optimism, Scott. But even if this scenario will be happening, the Arab parties will have no influence on the security policy of Israel. Even if they will join the government, they will get some budgets for the Arab society. They will get some maybe privilege here and there, but they will have zero influence on the international relations of Israel, on the policy in Gaza, on the policy in Lebanon, on the policy in Iran. They will be out of the game because they are excluded from the political game in Israel in any case. 20% of the Israelis have formal rights, but they are totally excluded, and nobody counts them and nobody listens to them. So therefore, I totally agree with Javier. Any alternative government will be maybe nicer and will talk in a more moderate way. And some really radical neo-Nazi elements will be finally out of the game. But the policy at its core will remain the same. The Israeli opposition didn't say a word, as Javier said, a word against the war, again, a word against the presence in Gaza, and a word not against the continuing apartheid in the West Bank. They are all in favor of it.
Julie, I have to ask you about this international stabilization force that you mentioned. You have Indonesia, Morocco, Kosovo, Albania, and Kazakhstan who have committed to sending either troops or police to be part of this. But what is the holdup in actually getting this implemented, you think?
I mean, there's many. One is that it's very unclear still what the mandate of this international stabilization force is going to be. And so many states have given somewhat rhetorical support for it, but are very hesitant to really commit troops until there's a deeper understanding of what they'll actually be doing. No one wants to be in the business of needing to either disarm Hamas themselves or go up against the IDF. Secondly, though, I would say is, Israel has been stalling in providing what are called SOFA, supportive force agreements, which essentially allow for foreign military troops and military presence in another state's domain, so to speak, though, of course, within occupied territory here. And so without those agreements, these forces can't deploy and can't begin things on the ground. The one exception that we're hearing is possibly the introduction of Moroccan and Kosovo forces to the Rafah area, if and when some kind of humanitarian zone might be set up there. That's what the Americans want. But again, the Israelis are stalling there, and we don't expect that until early 2027 at the earliest.
Gideon, the Israelis have agreed to this on paper, but can you see a scenario where Israel actually allows foreign troops inside of Gaza?
I don't have to foresee. I see the reality on the ground. Until now, Israel didn't let anyone to Gaza. All those committees are still waiting for a green light from Israel. And that's also a good opportunity to remind all of us that Israel prevents the media from getting into Gaza now over 3 years, which is really unheard of, because now, so to say, there is no fighting. What right does Israel have not to let media inside Gaza and tell the world what is really happening there? So I don't see Israel letting international forces in unless the Americans will insist. But I don't see that the Americans are too troubled by this.
Javier, I want to ask you about the future of Hamas, because they're supposed to disarm, and ostensibly they've agreed to this. They're also supposed to not have a role in governing the Gaza Strip in the future. Ostensibly, they've also agreed to that. Yet right now, they're in the midst of these internal elections to find a new leader, and I'm just trying to figure out why. I mean, it seems like they're supposed to be making themselves defunct, and yet they're holding these elections as if they're going to continue to be a force. What is going to be the role of Hamas in the future in the Gaza Strip?
I don't think Hamas is going to disappear by decree. There is a context that has allowed for Hamas to grow. Now, clearly, Hamas popularity is very low. And I hear from some people in Gaza that Hamas people are currently concerned about their own safety because of their very low popularity in Gaza. Now, I think it's important to deal with Hamas as what they are. They are a Palestinian faction. And to be able to return to Gaza, let's say the Palestinian Authority, to reunify Gaza and the West Bank, which would be the basis, if anyone wants to talk about a meaningful political process, there should be a sort of a meaningful national dialogue between Palestinians, which of course will include that Hamas will not have control over the government in Gaza, but at the same time, will be able to provide a way out for the disarmament of Hamas on one side, but on the other side as well, for the protection of Palestinians and to be able to guide all of this into a direction of a political process that ends the occupation and not that perpetuates the status quo or that allows for the prospects of more ethnic cleansing and annexation in Palestine.
Julie, briefly, what do you think the future role of Hamas will be?
Well, again, I would say right now they're not giving many options in the optics of the Board of Peace, and that's one reason why the disarmament has not moved forward. And other models that we've seen disarmament work, Northern Ireland, South Africa, there was a political pathway open to groups to take as a sort of off-ramp and part of a negotiated settlement, and that simply is not being offered to Hamas right now. So they are looking to stay relevant in different areas where they are. I can say they still have a lot of legitimacy within the Palestinian political sphere, even from people who don't actively vote for them and support them. They still see them as an important party and element within Palestinian politics that will have some kind of foothold in the future.
Gideon, I have not heard a lot of optimism coming from you today, but I'm wondering if you can try to give us some. Is there a scenario that you can envision, either the Americans pressuring the Israelis or whatever it may be, where this 20-point peace plan actually does work and you actually might have some kind of workable system on the ground?
I'll do my best and I will fail because I don't see the devotion of the international community. And without the devotion of the international community, Israel will continue with the status quo. And the status quo is very explosive. The status quo means a child killed every day, at least one. And it means continuing to hold those 2 million people without future, without present, without homes, without nothing. The only breakthrough that I can see must come from the international community. It will by all means not come from Israel. Forget about it. The Israelis will not one shining morning say, oh, let's pull out of Gaza. It's not nice what we are doing. Forget about it. And the international community is now preoccupied with Iran. And Gaza, as usual, is paying the price.
Yeah, well, for the sake of Gazans, we all hope, obviously, that something happens to move the situation along and give some people some hope, because you've painted a pretty grim picture there. I will have to leave it there. We appreciate all of your time today. Javier Abu-Eid, Julie Norman, and Gideon Levy. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Scott McLean, and the whole team here in Doha. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment. Stay tuned.